This house is documented to have been built by a carpenter in 1878 to 79, a little over 40 years after the City of Adelaide was first established. In a few years, it'll be 150 years old. No wonder there are a few cracks. It has 5 original rooms and 5 original fireplaces, including in the kitchen. Judging by the layout of the house, the bathroom was incorporated into it at a later date, probably in the 1920s or 30s. Both my parents were from Adelaide. They were globetrotters, but they always called Adelaide home and returned with me in the early 80s. I spent my teens living in the hills and went to Glenunga High. I'm proud to say that was back when it was still a bogan school and had just 500 students. But, as is the case for so many, Adelaide wasn't large enough to contain my dreams. So when I finished uni, I went in search of greener pastures. Like my parents, though, I always thought of Adelaide as home. So a few decades later, I returned with my 2 sons. I was hoping to buy a place in Norwood, but nothing really suitable came up there, so I started to look further afield. The second time I walked into this house, I was with a building inspector. I recall it being strangely still and quiet, like it was holding its breath. As I walked down the hallway, I felt like the house was giving me a big, welcoming hug, almost as if I'd finally come home. They say the house chooses its owner. It certainly felt like it did in this case. On the morning of the auction, there was one auspicious omen. My son had built a little house out of wooden coffee stirrers as a Christmas ornament. A friend of mine absent-mindedly picked it up when he had intended to pick up his phone. He looked at me and said, "I think someone's going to buy a house today." Sure enough, the auctioneer was soon calling sold in my favour. Number 8 Regent Street was mine, and I was thrilled. The boys and I moved in May 2017, and it wasn't long before we had our first fire to celebrate. One of the things that really attracted me to the house was the fireplaces, and I loved the way the mantles had been stripped back to bare stone. I couldn't wait to light my very own fire in my very own house. In a funny way, I feel that I was guided here. My father had passed away in 2008. He was born in 1927 in Robsart Street, which, as I discovered only after I bought this house, is just 2 streets away. And the house he was born in is almost directly south from here. He was born on the 22nd of February. The lot number of the block that number 8 stands on is 222. The house where my father spent his early years was next door to a stables and carriage company that was operated by his uncle Alfred. Alf was also a founding member of the Sturt Football Club. Since moving into number 8, I've often wondered about the others who've lived here and all the people who've come and gone, what their lives were like, if they were happy here. I sense that they were because the house has such a great vibe. Most people who visit comment on the way it feels. I sometimes think of the front door as a sort of time capsule or portal. For a long time after buying the house, I wondered if the men who'd lived here had fought in the 2 world wars, or if the women living here had seen their husbands or sons go off to war. I thought of the men walking out through the door, wondering when or if they would return, and of the women waiting, watching that same door, longing for the day their loved ones would walk back in and be safe home again. Taking part in this house history presentation prompted me to finally do some research. I found that one of the owners of the house was indeed a soldier. His name was John Quinn. His army records show that he was an outer works shearer when the war began. He joined up in 1940, and a month later he bought this house. Perhaps the security of a regular income enabled him to do so. It would be 5 long years of fighting, including in Tobruk and Borneo, before John could settle down to enjoy his hard-earned house. I can imagine him in quieter moments on the battlefield, thinking of his home and dreaming of being in the safety of its walls and a nice, warm, comfortable bed. After he was finally discharged from the army and able to settle, He stayed on here for another 15 years until 1959. I'm not sure when the homes next door were built, but I think it might have been sometime after this one. There are French doors on the western wall of the house that open onto a path running down the side. I can't help but wonder if they once opened onto a more extensive garden. Perhaps those doors also have a magical quality. On a quiet afternoon one weekend in October 2021, I was sitting on the sofa next to the doors doing some research on my laptop when I heard someone pound on the doors. The pounding was in a pattern, 3, 4, 3. It was quite distinct and not aggressive, but urgent. I looked up, expecting to see someone there, but to my surprise, no one was. I thought perhaps it was pranksters, so I jumped up and looked out the window to see if someone was crouched outside or running out the gate. Nothing. I was mystified. I walked outside for a better look and replicated the sound. It was definitely what I'd heard. To this day, I cannot explain what happened. Was it an echo from the past? A time when someone had urgently pounded on those doors because they needed to raise an alarm? I never feel truly alone here. The house certainly has a presence or two. Perhaps it's just the spirit of the place. In any case, I find it comforting, and I feel very protected here.